Welcome, everyone. My name is Cherie Lindberg, and I have David Grand here as my guest today, and with the intention and purpose of talking about the evolution of brain spotting with the neuroexperiential method of brain spotting or model of brain spotting. So do you want to get started, David, or is there how do we want to begin today, just to kind of inform and share and creative ideas about what that all means?
I'll talk, and when you have questions or comments, feel free to jump in, especially if you have like a question that somebody who's watching this might have.
Okay, that sounds
Okay.
great. Mhm.
Okay. In anticipating the conference that we had in July 2021 in Denver, um, uh, about a half a year before, I started to prepare myself for what I wanted to present. And I had been developing the neuroexperiential process and sort of the preliminary neuroexperiential model. But when I decided that this is something that I want to present as my keynote, I started to really ponder it and meditate on it and take some notes and so on. And then leading up to actually sitting down to write the keynote, I just delved deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And everybody who's watching here should be able to have access to to a written copy of my keynote from the conference. It's pretty much out there, but Cherie and I will figure out how to make it available to you if you don't have it. I can come at this in so many different ways, but I think I'll start by saying that in my evolution as a therapist, there were certain things that made sense to me and certain things that didn't make sense to me right from the beginning, decades ago. Again, one of the things that didn't make sense to me was the use of the concept the mind. Now I know the mind, actually can mean many things, and it has value. Many people rely on the word and the concept, but it was always very vague and undefined to me. Because as a tangible person, I like to know where something is and know what it is and be able to look at it or hold it and so on. But I didn't realize that there were a lot of things that I was learning in graduate school, in training programs and supervision, that were under the umbrella of psychology or psychotherapy that I just took at face value. And it sort of matched the way that I was taught to be a therapist from the beginning, which was relational, and there was sort of a CBT, cognitive behavioral kind of aspect to it. And even when I started studying psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic psychotherapy, there was sort of an umbrella to all this. And the umbrella was that what I didn't know or understand, it was a top-down umbrella. It was looking at the self, looking at how we operate from a top-down basis. After in the late and in the 1990s, I started to become much more aware of the body and its role and its presence in the psychotherapeutic process, and then of course more brain aware, brain wise. But with all that, I started to begin to understand what I sort of knew intuitively all along, but I began to understand that everything is bottom up, and that anything that's top down is sort of a secondary loop, I call it. Everything comes up, and sometimes things secondarily go down, but it's not that much, and it doesn't go that far and that deep. And as in my practice, and then as I discovered and started to develop brain spotting, I didn't realize that the terms and the concepts of psychotherapy and psychology actually didn't match what I was experiencing with my clients, what was happening. And it really took me a while to begin to recognize this. Now, yeah, Cherie?
No, I'm listening, and I involuntarily made a noise because I'm like, yeah, I'm getting what you're saying. When you're sitting there in the presence of your client, your schooling, everything that you learned in school, like it's not the same. Like what you're doing with the client and how you're feeling the client and being there with the client doesn't always inform that, is what I'm understanding. I'm agreeing with you.
And in many ways it confuses and contradicts it.
Yeah.
And again, I've been talking for years about that the model of history taking leading to diagnosis formation, leading to treatment planning, is problematic. It makes sense. It's really what I was schooled in, and what you and many of the rest of us were schooled in. But when somebody comes into your office and you are trained in brain spotting and have some experience in brain spotting, how you sit with the person, how they come in, and how they are influenced by how you sit with them, doesn't really fit that diagnostic model. And in the context of uncertainty, we do try to have some idea of what's going on and why, but we have to really, in all humility, recognize the great limitation of what we can possibly know about where things are coming from, where they are, and where they're heading. So putting together uncertainty, putting together the idea of the body and the deep nervous system, the subcortical nervous system, as being where information really begins and really rises up. When I say the neuro, that's part of what I mean by the neuro. And then as it rises up from deep in the body, deep in the nervous system, the subcortex, as it rises towards conscious awareness, which is somewhere between the limbic system and the neocortex. It's more neocortical, but there is a limbic awareness. It comes up from the neuro to the experiential. The experiential is the first sense, beginning conscious sense we have of what's going on inside of ourselves. And I believe that this is a model. It's a hypothesis with many hypotheses in it. I believe that it comes up and starts as the sensory, that the experiential starts with feeling in our bodies and what we see and what we hear, smell and taste. These are things that we, have a certain amount of consciousness about. And then from there, the emotions that go along with it, the emotions that we're carrying, and the emotions that get elicited by the sensory, in addition to the intuitive. The intuitive is, I describe as, it's what we know just because we know it. And in life, we usually experience that if we listen to our intuition, that things go reasonably well for us. And the problems come up when we don't listen to or trust our intuition. But this is just that arising from the deep self, the deep brain body self, into conscious awareness. And from there, in that neuroexperiential ride or journey, things arrive at the neocortex, where we have thinking and language and conceptualization and perspective and planning and analysis and all of these things. But that, and I also believe that the neocortex, without being fed constantly from the body, from the subcortex, from the sensory, the emotional and the intuitive, the neocortex has nothing to work with, just in and of itself. And that what we call knowing, informational knowing, really comes out of experiential knowing, is fed by experiential knowing. And it happens so fast and happens so constantly that, we don't recognize it. We can't recognize it as it's happening. But so this is what I mean in the broadest sense of the neuroexperiential. And it's really very different from what is the psychological or the psychotherapeutic. I'm not going to go into trying to define those now, except to define how the neuroexperiential is a different way of looking at things. And it gives us as brain spotting therapists a template, a perspective by which to receive our clients and by which to understand what happens with our clients with us in the sessions, and what the client leaves with at the end of the session, and ultimately what they leave with at the end of the therapy. Now, at the same time, brain spotting is fully international and embraces, all levels of diversity, whether it's the diversity of all the countries and cultures and languages in our world, or whether it's the diversity in each country, and there's such rich diversity there. Psychology and Western medicine are really just have arisen in the last few hundreds of years, and have taken on a certain viewpoint of science that is particularly Western, and it's more neocortically oriented and less, subcortically and somatically oriented, and very much less oriented towards energy. So when I say neuro, I'm not just using neuro to represent neurobiological, neuronal, neurophysiological, from a Western medicine, Western psychology point of view. I'm really looking at it from a universal point of view, taking into account not just the Western concepts, but also taking into account Eastern concepts, and not just taking into account the concepts of the last few hundred years, but really taking into account the knowledge and the wisdom of thousands of years, which is more what indigenous wisdom is about. Indigenous healers have been historically and are still presently using healing methods that are not understood, or sometimes looked askance at by Westerners, and that's a tragic mistake, because there's a lot of wisdom there. But if it can't be proven by Western science, then it tends to be dismissed or minimized. So when I talk about the frame of the neuroexperiential model, it is a wide, expansive, and fluid and permeable frame that holds within it and even around it all the wisdom that is available to us, all the knowledge, all the experience. So I'm using the term neuro to take into account wisdom West and East, wisdom modern and ancestral and indigenous, so that because brain spotting is not a solely or primarily a Western approach or Western model for supporting human healing. So it, as such, the neuroexperiential model, and I've just proposed it. It's just like just back in July 2021. That's a blink of an eye. And I've proposed it and I'm building it, but I've proposed it as something that for everybody else to be able to contribute to and build and develop, especially with wisdom and insight that I don't have, and to bend it and shape it as we go. But as such, it's an open model. As such, it's an intuitive, creative model, at the same time as being a scientific model. Cherie, I've been talking for a while. Any thoughts come up? Anything you'd want to say or ask me?
There's lots of thoughts for sure. I mean, again, when I'm just listening and observing the information as it's flowing through myself, and love the idea of the universalness of it. I was just thinking of humankind when you said that, like humankind, like we're all interconnected, and that how information flows through our body, like you're saying, bottom up, and how we can use our system to frame it in a way that we can get deeper access to what's inside of us, so that we can know ourselves better and know and heal ourselves, the whole self-healing mechanism. I think one of the concepts that I've learned through training with you, David, is how we take the scanner and turn the scanner on itself. And this takes it to I think a deeper level. I mean, my brain was going, you're talking about epigenetics, you're talking about generational, education and practices throughout centuries. I mean, it just, I started to go out into the cosmic when you started talking.
And it's not intended to do that, but it does do that.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no real intentions in this other than to really widen and expand our viewpoint and our awareness of everything that's on a macroscopic level and everything that's on a microscopic level. I want to add to this that the neuroexperiential model is an evolutionary model. It's based on the concept that everything is always moving and changing and evolving, and nothing ever stays the same. That's the problem with a more strictly Western scientific model, that doesn't really allow for or recognize the evolution, when in fact all Western science is always evolving. We look at where it is from where it was, and then we look at where it goes from where it is. Old cherished beliefs, all these facts that have been proven end up getting revisited and reopened, and we find out, no, it's not exactly as we thought it is. But in the context of it being an evolutionary model, it's a developmental model. Okay. And the model looks at the human being and human beings as coming from someplace. And it really starts with the generational, and the generational or ancestral is genetic. Okay, we all carry the genes that go back countless generations, and it also carries all the experience of previous generations. And the further back you go in generations, the more people it is. We have 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16 great great grandparents, 32 great 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 grandparents, and then 64 and 128. That's a lot of people. That's a lot behind us. And we tend to think of in our field of the generational in terms of trauma, that we're carrying generational trauma, and it gets passed on, and it gets passed on with energy, and it gets passed on through what we hold in the body. But we don't tend to look at the full spectrum of what gets passed on to us generationally, including gifts and strength and spirit and wisdom. So as a generational model, we draw from, as a developmental model, we draw from the generational, and then we come to the point of conception, and how over 9 months in utero the human being develops in incredible ways, but is also very much having experiences. The intrauterine experience is different for each person, and it shapes each person, leading ultimately to birth. And birth is a profound experience for the mother and for the child coming out into the world, and the nature of how that goes. The end of being in utero to emerging, and then the first few days and weeks of life. all powerfully shape us. They're all powerful developmental aspects. And then from there, the first year and two of life, um, so much of us is formed by that point, that the development that goes on from year one and year two is all on top of that tremendous sweep of development that led to that. And development is again, trauma is just an element of that. But so much of who we are, what makes us who we are, in positive ways, in neutral ways, in problematic ways, comes developmentally. The place that I'm leading to with this, and we're going to be talking more about this in future conversations that we have, is that in, when we look at diagnosis, or the diagnostic model of the neuroexperiential model, doesn't look at categorizing primarily. It looks at understanding what something is and where it comes from. Our diagnostic thinking is like, what's happening? Where is this coming from? What and where is this going? As opposed to giving a diagnosis from the nomenclature. And because it's a developmental model, it's not a disorder model. Okay, and there's a lot of value to all of what has been developed over decades and even centuries. But if you look in the diagnostic manuals, almost every diagnosis ends with the term disorder. Okay, which implies that there is something wrong with the person, as opposed to defining that there have been developmental issues that have led to the person manifesting whatever they're manifesting, feeling it on the inside, showing it on the outside, that are, instead of being a disorder, is a natural human reaction pattern. I'm still working on the language of this.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of calling it post-traumatic stress disorder, to call it, post-traumatic reaction pattern. Instead of calling it a disorder, it was really looking at it as the natural outgrowth of what happened before that. It's a huge difference in how we look at and receive the client. If we see the client as having a disorder or having disorders, something's wrong with them, as opposed to if we see them having reaction patterns that are developmental, then we understand with them that it comes from where it comes from, and it is naturally present and it's naturally expressing itself. Attachment disorder. It's not a disorder. It's that the attachment experience of this, young being was so chaotic or empty or unpredictable or frightening or dangerous, that good enough attachment wasn't available to that person in their own early process. Okay, that's not a disorder. This is what we expect to come out of these kind of early developmental experiences. DID, dissociative identity disorder. It's not a disorder. It's a mirror. It's a reflection of where the person has been and what they've experienced and how their system in its own genius figured out how to survive as best it could. I could go on with that, but so again, and we'll may have a comment or question or two. To be honest, we'll finish this soon. It's a bottom-up model. It's an open, expansive model. It's a developmental model, and it is not a model that puts labels on. The purpose of the model is to understand and to have a language by which we can communicate with each other, to understand together, and a language that we can have to communicate with the people who come to us, come with us. And of course, if we look at the fact that in brain spotting, and I haven't even talked about the frame, and I'll talk about the frame next time, but that the frame that the client brings and the frame we hold with them leads to a dynamic, intensified process that we call the comet, where we try to follow it and try to get into and stay in the tail of the comet. That's developmental also. You know, it's the client's experience with us is developmental, and it's for us to be present with and follow that development or the redevelopment as it happens, which is another way perhaps of talking about healing. So there too, how we receive our clients, how we understand them, how we sit with them, and very much so how we follow them wherever they go, is very much developmental. I'll say my last comments on this are saying that I don't think that what we see when we do brain spotting with our clients is very psychological at all. There's some psychological elements to it, but the psychological is almost like the neocortex that you arrive at the end, where you can give this sort of after the fact, perspective on, or analysis of what you've seen, but it's only after it's over, actually. That appears to have limited use.
Yeah, as I'm listening, there's three main points that came up as I was listening to that in our future series of talking about the neuroexperiential model method of brain spotting. I'm hearing you say, and this is a distinction in a lot of different therapies, I think, we follow our clients versus us leading, or our traditional education is about us being the expert and knowing, what to do. And instead, our belief is that the client system knows what it needs to do. If we hold, and we'll talk again about this in another video, if we hold the frame and we're relational and we're present with the client, we follow the client wherever it leads. Mm-hmm. Based on what you are talking about as well, about, folks adapting to their developmental histories to survive, instincts, reflexes, all those kinds of things. To me, that sounds like a real true trauma-informed care model, where we are compassionate and acknowledging that and validating our client's experience, that makes sense that you do XYZ given your developmental history, that you needed to adapt, and which gives more curiosity to help the client be curious about their evolution and their development, versus we have to fix you and you have a disorder. And then what that leads into is less stigmatizing.
How about no stigmatizing?
Yeah. I think
our offices and our sessions should be stigma-free zones.
Yeah, I think, again, David, what you're doing here, and you do this often, is that you turn everything the way culture is, or the way we are perceiving it, and you give us an alternative way of perceiving, an alternative story to shift from. And to me, that is life-giving. That is life-giving to our clients. It brings back dignity. It brings back connection. Instead of I'm here and you're there, it takes power out of, of the relationship, so that we can sit with our clients. And again, the word humankind is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I look forward to our next conversation that we will have and share with our brain spotting community, and to be able to start to delve into more specifics of the neuroexperiential model.
Great. Thank you for being here today and talking about it. And we look forward to future videos.
Right. Thank you, Cherie.
Thank you, David.